side by side. Oh, he's lost it. He's dummied him. What a great move.
I'm starting last on the grid, so I need some tips.
That's a mistake from Leclerc.
Down goes Ben Stokes.
Oh, sorry, Arthur.
Contact between teammates. Oh, no!
You are alive, mate.
Hi, and welcome to Need for Speed, virtual racing with the Formula One Esports Series. I'm Heather McLean, editor at SVG Europe. Formula One raised the checkered flag on the first season of its Esports Series in 2017. While its fourth series has been delayed until later this year due to COVID-19, the third season saw participation figures going through the roof. I'm here today to talk to F1's Head of Digital Business Initiatives and Esports, Julian Tan, about that growth. Hi, Julian.
Hi, Heather.
Hi. Okay, so my first question for you is around the distribution and viewership of the Esports Series. So the F1 Esports Series is distributed both OTT and linear. With reference to that, can you give us an overview of how the series has grown, looking at both audience participation and viewing figures since the beginning when you did the trial in 2017 to the end of 2019?
Yeah, sure. So we've had quite a great experience, I would say, sort of operating within esports. Like you mentioned, Heather, we entered the space in 2017 with a little bit of a pilot to kind of test the waters a little bit to see what the general reception would be, both from our existing fan base, but also our new fan base towards kind of entering the world of esports. And we've seen a lot of success. And we measure our success actually across those two KPIs. So participation and viewership being our sort of core two sort of KPIs that we use. And, you know, what we've actually seen is that last year, 2019, was our biggest ever year. You know, we had, by way of participation, we had over 109,000 people from across the globe attempt to participate. And this represented a 65% increase year on year, which obviously is a tremendous year on year growth. And from a viewership perspective, we had over 8.7 million people across both linear channels and also on our own platforms. That represented an increase of 76%, you know, year on year. So we're seeing massive growth. I think as our audience are getting familiarized with the concept of virtual racing, esports, and actually seeing that it actually, you know, presents itself as really entertaining racing entertainment that, you know, people can enjoy whether or not it's in the real world or virtual. It looks very similar. So we've been very pleased, I think, to see the rate at which our esports program has really accelerated over the coming years, and we'll be launching our next season at the end, you know, towards the end of this year as well for 2020.
Cool. Okay. And how has your content distribution on both OTT and linear channels evolved since the series began? You know, what did you start off with, and then how have those grown?
Our distribution, I think, to start off with, was primarily online. So kind of going back to the I guess, regular consumption habits of esport content, a lot of it does exist online. So in our first season, first couple of seasons, we were on Twitch and we were on YouTube. Twitch and Facebook, excuse me. And we very quickly sort of scaled up our online distribution both across YouTube. So now we're on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, as well as expanding our distribution in China. So within China, we are on Weibo and Huya. I think there is a lot of, you know, from an online distribution perspective, just kind of thinking about just general esports consumption behaviors. A lot of the esports consumption does take place on these platforms, and we've seen a lot of growth actually in terms of people watching and consuming and interacting with our content online through these platforms. But also we've seen across the linear TV side that the kind of uptake from linear broadcasters for esports content has really been accelerating. And I think a lot of it also comes down to really what our core objectives, that's kind of aligned with our core objectives of operating in this space, which is for us at Formula One, esports represents a real opportunity for us to reach out to a younger audience, a new audience. And I think linear broadcasters are also starting to dip their toes a little bit into the space of esports, just trying to understand a little bit what it can offer. And, you know, from what I've seen is that the uptake has been increasing. And I think the merits around, you know, the younger demographic and getting a different kind of content onto those platforms are also starting to emerge. So that's really positive as well.
Cool. And who are some of these linear broadcasters?
So our content is distributed by ESPN in the US, for example, Sky Sports here in the UK, Fox Sports in Asia, Ziggo Netherlands. We work with our global broadcasters who, you know, take on our real life Formula One content and are able to supplement the real life Formula One content with our esports content, because our esports content actually aligns quite nicely and supplements quite nicely our sort of what I will call our main product in the real life racing.
Cool. Okay. And then that kind of ties into the next question. How has the spread of COVID-19 this year affected the Esports Series, and perhaps what you provide the linear channels as well?
Yeah, it's, you know, I think that when we entered the space of esports 2 years ago, first of all, nobody would have figured, you know, nobody would have predicted that we would be in this situation 2 years later. You know, it's obviously a very difficult situation and nobody wants to be in this situation. You know, I think that we have been quite fortunate, I suppose, whereby we've invested in a product in esports, you know, in 2017, where we saw an opportunity to see how we can actually bring racing action to our fans during this time with, you know, our real life racing being either postponed or canceled. You know, we felt like there was an opportunity that potentially could kind of evolve our esports product a little bit to bring about racing in a virtual sense, and allow that to take place obviously remotely, which would be, you know, in a safe way to do that. And so, you know, with our real life races being postponed and canceled, we thought, okay, let's see how we could actually use the tools that we have in esports. And, you know, we have our drivers who, you know, some of them will be available during this time to see how they could, you know, bring about some racing action for our fans. Because at the end of the day, I think our fans want to see their heroes racing. And if they can't race in the real world, they'd love to see, I think, our F1 heroes, like Charles Leclerc and Alex Albon, race in a virtual sense, right? So we quickly pulled together the concept of a virtual Grand Prix, where on every weekend that we were, I guess, had scheduled a real life Grand Prix, we would be organizing a virtual Grand Prix where we'll be inviting all of the Formula One drivers, all our current Formula One drivers, to participate in that, to bring about some light-hearted racing action for our fans, and be able to kind of create some content during this time for our fans. And they've been very well received. All of our content, they're distributed on our platforms on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Huya, and Weibo, as well as on our linear broadcast partners as well, ESPN, Sky Sports, as I mentioned, Fox Sports Asia, and you know, many other broadcasters around the world. So our content is distributed globally, and we've seen terrific engagement in that content during this time. And, you know, anecdotally, have heard a lot of, you know, positive feedback from our fans saying that, you know, in the absence of being able to see any racing, they're really, you know, been really grateful to be able to see some form of racing that Formula One has been able to pull together during this time.
I think the virtual Grand Prix series really shows how, when you brought in the Pro Draft in 2018, it's really integrated like the real life races with the Esports Series. So that's really cool. Do you think it's something that you might be able to carry on next season if, you know, hopefully we'll all be out in the real world again? Is it something you could carry on? You know, is it something that the real world drivers could commit to, do you think?
I think that there will be elements that we have certainly picked up as part of operating in this space during this time that I think will be very useful learnings that we can actually use for our esports program, so our F1 Esports Series, the virtual championship, and also wider as part of our wider sport. And I think one of the really interesting things that we've learned during this time, for example, is the fact that by having the F1 drivers participate in our virtual races, we've actually been able to see a different part of the drivers. You know, when they're streaming on Twitch, for example, you're able to see the more human side of these drivers. You know, they're really funny characters. They're really charismatic characters. And I think that doesn't necessarily come through when you're racing on the real life track, when they're behind a helmet, for example. So, I think there's certain elements that esports unlocks for us that we think that, would be interesting food for thought, as we think to kind of evolve both our esports program, but also our wider sport potentially as well.
Cool. Okay. And then as far as the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned, everyone's on lockdown. Has this improved perhaps your viewing figures, or how has it affected, the numbers that you're seeing?
That's a very interesting question. I think it's the spotlight on esports and gaming at this time, where you have most live sports, going dark, has obviously, been increased, right? And I think that, a lot more people are exposed to esports. I think that just from our perspective, the F1 esports initiatives that we do, our virtual Grand Prix have been the most successful esports activities or esports broadcasts that we have ever done since entering the space in 2017. And I think that's a combination of different things. I think obviously spotlight on esports has increased. I think that there's still a general demand, and, people want to see live sport. And, I think esports is still able to kind of provide some of that live sport, particularly for us, because our esports is very well aligned, I suppose, with a real life product, in that from a viewer's perspective, it works on a brilliant game that looks, very realistic and provides a very authentic way of consuming racing content. I think it's the gap to get engaged with that sort of content for us within our existing fan base, and also new fan bases to kind of come into the sport, is maybe not as wide as other esport titles out there, for example. So we're very fortunate to be able to have an esports offering or esports product that is very closely aligned to our main product, to help us serve our kind of wider objectives for the sport, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, as you said, esports have really come into their own during the pandemic. It's something for sports fans to engage with. Do you think this aspect of esports during this period of time will perhaps help the popularity of the F1 esports series going forward?
Yeah, I would, it's hard to say, but I would, if I had to guess, I would say that there would be a positive impact, mainly because, I think we've also used this opportunity in our virtual Grand Prix, which have had, a lot of attention, to also help elevate our F1 esports gamers, the professional gamers themselves as well. So before each Grand Prix, virtual Grand Prix, for example, we always will have a pro exhibition race that takes place before the virtual Grand Prix. And yes, the virtual Grand Prix is around our real life F1 drivers, racing against each other, and, past F1 drivers and celebrities. But the pro exhibition that takes place before is really our pro gamers, and they're the best in the world. They're exhibiting, they're pushing the limits of the game to put on amazing racing action. And I've seen a lot of comments on social and people saying that, this is the first time that they're watching the professional gamers, race on our Formula One games. Actually present some really exciting racing, and that they would want to watch it when we come back, with our Pro Series, for example. So I think there will be a little bit of maybe a little bit of halo effect from this, from being able to use this opportunity to highlight our pro gamers as well. I think more generally, as esports as an industry as well, as I said, during this time, the spotlight has been shone on esports and gaming. And I think that from an exposure perspective as well, the fact that more people are exposed and maybe a little bit more familiarized with the concept of watching video gaming, people playing video gaming, I think that there will be, I think, a lasting effect of, people who are now more exposed to it, and so would want to kind of watch more, esports post, once we do get out of, once we do get racing, for example, go out there racing again.
Cool. And then last question for you, a bit of a big one really. Where are you going to take the F1 Esports Series? What's your 5-year plan?
Ooh. 5-year plan. And I think the part of the success of our strategy within Formula One has been being able to be nimble in navigating this space, because I think we're in a very unique position to be at the forefront of sim racing right now, just, you know, with the brand equity that Formula One has, for example, to actually start shaping the space as we are navigating it. And we've seen that, you know, we've by having the courage to chart our own path, or, you know, to try new things, to do things a little bit differently, move away from kind of the traditional model, has served us quite well, because we're able to kind of very quickly iterate on our product and test and learn very quickly. And I think that for us is a very important part in the way in which we operate and, you know, strategize within this space. But, you know, I think the North Star for us, which, you know, I think is that kind of guiding light for us, let's say, as we kind of navigate the esports space, has been, how can we create something that's truly unique in this space? Because the reality around esports is that the barriers to entry are actually quite low. You know, you have a game, have some rules, and you have a prize, and all of a sudden you have an esports series. And that's, and I think when you look at it that way, it's really important for us when we're operating in this space to not fall into the trap of just doing it for the sake of doing it. We need to understand what the role that esports actually plays in our sport, but also crucially, how we can create something that it has a competitive advantage that isn't easily replicable. And for us, that is combining the power of esports with the magic of Formula One, because Formula One is a very special, unique, and really quite a magical sport. So how can we use those elements to create a product, have those two worlds collide to create a product that is very unique? So, you know, things like getting all of our 10 Formula One teams leaning in and creating an esports team as part of the F1 Esports Series, and giving, you know, our fans the ability and the opportunity to go from, you know, living room to into an official Formula One team, is those sort of elements, you know, are, one, very difficult to replicate, and two, money can't buy. You know, those are very, very special experiences and opportunities that, you know, we are able to do because we're Formula One. And I think the more that we can lean on those sort of elements, the longer lasting our, you know, our success will be within this space. And I think that to a large extent, also not losing sight of why we are in this space, right? We need to remember that the core objective, there are a few core objectives of operating in this space, and let's not lose sight of that as we're navigating it. You know, things around accessibility, using our esports and gaming to break down borders and barriers into our sport, which as motorsports is not the most accessible sport. I always say you can pick up a basketball and play in your local court, but you can't just jump into a Formula One car. So using gaming and esports in that way is a really important, you know, really important objective. You know, things around creating new opportunities for our fans to kind of break into our sport, creating new supplementary content in a different kind of way. It's racing, but yes, it's virtual racing, but it's still racing. So, you know, I think there are a lot of different things that are very unique for us in Formula One, using esports as a grassroots into motorsports, for example, blurring the lines between virtual and real. You know, those sort of elements I think are really important for us to always keep in mind as we're navigating the space of esports and as we're developing our product within this space.
Brilliant. Okay, cool. Thank you very much for your time, Julian.
Thank you for having me, Heather.